Primary ignition.
Welcome to Unlimited Power. My name is D-Rod, and we're going to be talking about my experience as well as a champion interview from the most recent 1K hosted here in the Portland, Oregon area this last weekend, 2 weeks after the Shadows of the Galaxy release. Hosted here at Guardian Games. So let's just dive right into it. This was a really fun event. It wasn't as popular as some of our other 1Ks or the 2K that was hosted here about a month ago. And that was kind of something you could expect. Summertime is usually a little bit rough on a lot of card stores as a lot of people are traveling, you're spending money on vacations. There's a lot of events going on around, whether it's stuff like Gen Con, Comic Con, major sporting events, anything like that. There's always something in the summer that kind of draws a lot of people away from their local game store. However, we did get around 20 people, I think a little bit over 20 people at our 1K. I was excited to be there. I brought Sabine. You can find a link into the deck in the description below. It didn't do so well. I ended up going 2-3 with some really tough matches that almost got me into that top 8. But it was just Sabine with a little bit of some Mandalorian stuff. We went Sabine aggression, threw some dark sabers, and really surprised a lot of our opponents when we were able to swing pretty hard on turn 3 with a dark saber Sabine. But overall, I had a great time. Saw a lot of the locals there, people that I really enjoy playing with. Shout out to them, people like Alex, Thomas, and Rob. Great people there, and plenty of others that I was able to talk to over the day. Love hanging out at Guardian Games, one of just the biggest and classic stores, oldest stores in the Portland area. So this was a really great event. It was 5 rounds. You had Rebel Trader and TTI. They were going ahead and streaming the game, which was great. Hopefully next time I'll be able to join them and get us a couple more variety of some streams out there. But it was a really great experience. I kind of went in knowing it probably wasn't going to do so great, but I did want to have some fun. There were a lot of Bobas at this event, and we'll kind of hear a little bit about that. If you are unfamiliar, the person, Rob, who we'll be interviewing here in just a few minutes, he actually was playing Boba as well. So we saw Boba Command, we saw Boba Blue, Vigilance, we saw Boba Green. It was all there. I know I had a couple of bouts with Boba, did well in one, did poorly in the other. That's all right. Still had a great day, great time there. And, I wouldn't trade it. I look forward to the next 1K event here in the Portland area. And it's really nice that we're seeing multiple stores trying to do these large events, bringing in a lot of people from the city, outside the city, just having a great time. Let's go ahead and take a look at the deck that Rob, the champion of the 1K, brought in. Rob was playing a Boba Fett deck with the standard 30 card base, just generic thing. We see he's running a few 2-ofs and a little bit of some 1-ofs. His 3-ofs in the deck are definitely going to be the staples that really build out what the deck is trying to do. This deck has a lot of strong utility. It can hit fast. It can hit hard with cards like Surprise Strike. You have a great card like Cunning that gives you that utility. And overall, I wasn't surprised that this was what Rob was gonna bring to the table. We actually met up earlier in the week, and I'll talk about that once we bring Rob in. But, this deck just has it all. We see the bounce effects. We see the automatic attacks. We see the ability to deal with exhausted units. And one of the key things we see here, I want to say, is cards like Relentless Pursuit, some of the newer cards, the TIE Phantom, Boba's Armor, Bazine, Forlom, and Zuckuss. These cards are just really strong. They hit hard. They can really add to the deck's potential. I wasn't surprised to see a lot of these cards make their way into this final deck, nor is it surprising of how well Rob kind of piloted it. This is definitely a deck that takes some work to manage, but if you get used to it, pilot it well, play it a lot, you kind of can find the lines of play a little bit easier. You'll be familiar with them, I would say. And overall, it's just a really solid deck. From my opinion, this is something that I would play for fun if I just want to show someone some strong mid-range control. It's definitely not my play style, but it's definitely one I know I could enjoy playing for a bit. But if you know me, then you know I'm looking for some bigger ships than just the fire spray, right? Um, yeah, but this is great. Let's go ahead and start talking to Rob about this deck and his experience at the Portland 1K. All right. Rob, thanks so much for joining me and coming in and spending time talking about, you know, your experience at the Portland 1K hosted by Guardian Games. Really excited to have you. One of the things I wanted to mention was before we even got started of, you know, there was a lot of talk about your deck for people who've already seen it and saw what it was able to accomplish there. And I know a couple days earlier, you and I met up at our local store and we played a little bit. And I just remember like you brought out your deck and you were ready to test. You were just ready to go. And I was just sitting there like already like I brought like Grand Inquisitor like fun. I knew I just had to get it out of my head and just like I just want to see where this is at. And then you pulled out Boba Yellow and I was just like, well, I'm pretty sure I know how this is going to go, but let's find out. And it really was like to me it was very like kind of surprising, very exciting. But I knew just right off the bat, I'm like, this is going to be strong. And you already like showed me a couple cards that were crazy, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I know I was really excited that that was the deck you brought over to Guardian. So, yeah, just that was just one of those things I wanted to make sure to bring up as we began talking about, you know, this deck and this strategy. And before we start looking at that, talk to me a little bit about yourself and what drew you into playing Star Wars Unlimited. You've played some other games in the past. Would love to know what other games like that you've enjoyed and have played on a, you know, a pretty competitive level, at least going to a lot of events and things like that that I've seen you at.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, David. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I think like my card gaming, like competitive card gaming journey started in college with Magic the Gathering. I'm sure like a lot of other people played Magic competitively, did like the PTQ grinding system for about maybe like 4 to 6 years, PTQs, SEG opens, that kind of thing. In Texas, where the Texas Magic scene is pretty spiky and pretty cutthroat. Um, Also played Hearthstone well enough to be able to write SEO content for it. I
Wow.
did that for about a year for a digital publication. Um, from there, a friend of mine roped me into Flesh and Blood for a bit. He took it a lot further than I did. I was basically just like his playtesting partner for one particular matchup, but he is wound up being one of the like better, if not one of the best Lexis in the nation. Um, and Fab, and then that brings me to the Star Wars Unlimited. Your question was like what drew me to the game. I am a
Yeah.
Star Wars fan. uh, so I think that was like the first inkling. I know that there's like a long and storied and convoluted history of Star Wars trading card games. The last Star Wars trading card game I played was the one Wizards of the Coast made, which I think was just called Star Wars TCG. That
Yes.
released,
Yeah.
yeah, that released around when Attack of the Clones came out. Um, and it was similar to this in that like it had the different arenas. It was much more heavily involved in like dice rolling, which I think is something like Destiny was big
Hmm.
on as well. So much more high variance, um, but had the different arenas to kind of enable the different flavoring of all the cards and like what you expect out of a Star Wars product. Huge space battles, huge character moments, often with lightsabers, that kind of thing. Um, so it had similar DNA there. And I remember loving that game when I was a kid. In fact, when Wizards shuttered it, I actually became uh, a member of the community that like created like fan created sets
Yeah.
after it died. I was part of their playtesting team for a couple sets, so it was pretty cool. Yeah, a buddy of mine mentioned it to me. We played it a lot in Tabletop Simulator before the set came out. We really liked the flavor of the game, just how dynamic the action system was. We also design like games in our free time. Like we dabble in game design in our free time, so we were also really interested in how its resource system would work. Um, because I think that's like one of the huge touch points if you're designing a card game
Yeah.
right now
Yeah.
is how do you keep things like mana screw and mana flood from happening and keep your players invested and make sure that every game you play is an actual game where you have a chance. And we liked all those things. The draw two, the resource system worked really well. Um, the fact, like the leader system, giving an identity to the player that they can, build around and really champion. Yeah, all those things like seemed great at the outset, and so far, I mean, the game seems to be popular for how early the game has come out, especially around here in the Portland metro area. So yeah, it's really exciting, and I'm happy to be playing it.
Yeah, man, you just gave me a lot of great materials, like stuff I would love to talk to you about, as you know, you mentioned of just your history of playing different games with Magic, going to a lot of PTQs and the opens. That was definitely a scene for a while Magic was doing it. But there's a lot there I would love to touch base on, but we only have so much time, especially when it comes to the design of the game. Because I'm with you, the thing I felt like they did so well was letting you start off the game with two resources and letting you draw two. It's amazing how much, when you look at a lot of games and a lot of game design, how some of that really wasn't considered, right? When we talk about you need to start off with resources and using resources in game, no one says we should have two to begin with, right? And even just drawing two is a little rare in a lot of games, and it's just those kind of things. Agreed, that just kind of drew me to this. Any Star Wars card game was going to get my attention, but things like that definitely made me start thinking about, okay, there's some serious, R&D happening here, right? There's a lot of thoughts going into this, and what you can do and what kind of tempo the game creates when you're kind of starting off at this like faster pace almost in a game.
Yeah, for sure. I like what you said there too, like the thoughtfulness and like the sincerity of the design. That it's so easy to make a cash grab out of the IP,
Yeah.
but it's clear that like no, there are mechanics here that we believe in, and we want to make work.
Yeah, and I would say FFG has always done that very well. Even though we're on the third Star Wars game, each game you can tell again was intentional, was doing something, was trying something new, whether it was with LCG or trying to do something new with the dice mechanics, and even this one, it's great to still feel like we're not in the 90s era of, oh, if it has an IP that you can make money off of, turn it into a bad card game, right? Um, so it's nice that it's not just there for that, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we've looked at the deck. We have it up right now. Boba Cunning, kind of as I said, I saw it when you brought that in that Monday night, one of the local stores. I was like, okay, this is clear what he's going to be playing. What were some of the reasons that you decided to go with Boba Cunning for the first like big event here in the Portland area, and definitely there's only two 1Ks posted that day in the country, so definitely one of the bigger events we've seen at post set two. What made you want to go with Boba Cunning?
Yeah, I think first and foremost was probably just familiarity. I'd played the deck a lot in like the last month of set one. Had a lot of success with the deck. Had top aided the 2K here previously, like a month ago or so. Won a showdown with it. Felt very comfortable with its lines. Just enjoyed its lines of play too. I think that's like also really important that you enjoy the deck you're playing. Um, what's funny is you mentioned the Monday playtesting session at Batcave. I was not sure I was going to play it then. That was kind of like the first step out into the wild with set two and playing against other people outside of my testing environment. Um, and I was, I think, between Boba Yellow, Boba Green, and maybe Kira Green. It was like somewhere in those three. Um, one of the things I really liked about Boba Yellow going into set two is obviously like the number of cunning cards that got picked up um, from set two were obviously great. I think like the The difficulty was distilling which cards were worth playing, and which cards were perhaps too cute for ending the game, and trying to figure all that out in like basically 2 weeks was challenging. Um, So yeah, I think the other thing too was just like seeing what was expected, the expected decks to show up. I think like Sabine with Poe and Wrecker was pretty well known, and it was kind of just a question of whether or not like Darksaber was going to be a part of that package. Um, and in internal testing, I was like, okay, I still like Boba Yellow's matchup into Sabine. It was favored in set one. Still felt comfortable in set two. I felt like everybody was going to be bringing some level of aggro mid range that like the control decks were going to be really hard to find um, this early without an established meta. So I wanted to be on something that was more front forward. That if I ran into something that I had no idea about, like I just missed it entirely, that I could still put pressure on my opponent and get there. Again, with like that deck familiarity too, just knowing my lines and knowing
Yeah.
when I can end the game. So I think a combination of those reasons led me back to Boba Yellow.
Yeah, no, that's so wise there. I think that was the same thing I was thinking as you're going into it. It's you can kind of expect very little control. There are a couple things that you could predict would be there, especially in the R meta with how heavy it was. Felt like with Boba, a lot of places, Sabine, a lot of places. And definitely only doing something within 2 weeks, it feels good to kind of do something that's comfortable, or not comfortable in a bad way, but something again, like you said, where you kind of know the lines, you have enough experience of what your deck can get out of and where it can be successful. Um, and I know I had the same thing of like spending so many games playing Iden. If I were to bring Iden into that event, I probably would have had, I don't know if it would have changed my outcome overall with some of the decks I ran into, but I know one of those things I would have felt comfortable making a lot more decisions knowing where it would go. And so it's definitely, I feel like a lot of us were kind of at that same point at the 1K of just being like, I know majority of how this works, right? I know what I should and shouldn't do for the most part with the deck. And that experience just makes a difference, as opposed to someone who brings in something completely new that they haven't touched before and has only been like in print for 2 weeks, right?
For sure, for
Um,
sure.
were there any like combos or strategies you saw? Because you added a couple of new cards from set two into the Boba deck. Were there some things you were really excited about in your testing to throw in here? Like any just particular cards or strategies that you were hoping for?
I know the one I played against you Monday was a new adventure, which didn't it wound up not making the final list, and I'll talk a bit about why. I think that card was probably the most exciting. Just like the game introducing a blink effect
Yeah.
into the format. The Boba Yellow deck just naturally, I mean, even before including new cards, already could take advantage of that in so many different ways, whether it was bouncing, Cantina Bouncer, uh, to bounce another card back to the opponent's hand, resetting an ambush trigger, um,
That's what got
every
me. That's what surprised me so much that Monday when you Syndicate Lackeys and then New Adventures with Syndicate Lackeys. I'm like, oh my gosh, what value you got
yeah,
out of that?
yeah, uh, yeah. It when the card works, it's absolutely filthy, and then replaying a Fett's Fire Spray, I think is like the dream.
Yeah.
Um, My issue with it was it felt like a card that you had to be all or nothing on, like 3
Hmm.
copies or 0 copies. In my list, I could only fit in 1, and I was getting frustrated with drawing it at just, like, inopportune times or requiring, myself to set up an entirely new game plan just to make the 1 card work, and I was just like, "Ah, this isn't really worth it." So that one's still on the back burner. It's like possible that it works in a different sort of list down the line. Um, Going into the tournament, I loved Relentless Pursuit. Flipping Boba, Relentless Pursuit to give Boba leader a shield token was such big game in so many matches throughout the
Yeah.
weekend. It's like a little security blanket putting the shield token on Boba Leader. It's just like, so many decks need to kill Boba Leader by attacking into it, and just the shield token just knocks that off immediately. So I think Relentless Pursuit was great. Um, Bazine was another all star, I think, of the weekend. I love the two copies I had of Bazine in the deck. Just the flexibility from the Smuggle row, but also drawing it late came in clutch several times, which I'll probably talk about later when we go through the rounds. So yeah, I was really happy with those two introductions from set two for sure.
Yeah, those are great cards. I know Bazine is just, man, yeah, she's going to get rid of stuff. Just, it's so great. I think I've been lucky, and usually when people, or a few times when people played Bazine against me, I somehow drew that card right after. So that worked out. But yeah, Bazine is just early feels good, late feels good, and even mid because you're deploying Boba, usually like on turn 4. So still feels good to get that out and just take care of that one piece of removal that kind of like you said, if you can put that shield on Boba, he's going to stay out there, and most of the time your opponent's going to have to swing into it, you know, despite unless there's a rival's fall or for some reason you only have Boba out and you get hit with power of the dark side. But outside of that, yeah, you're completely right. My experience going into the 1K, someone got that Boba out, and as soon as they put out the pursuit card, captured, got the shield, I was just like, "What's happening?"
Right.
um, it was crazy. But yeah, let's go into that the 1K. So how do you feel like you did the first 5 rounds? I know one of your games was shown on TTI, which was great. So a lot of people got to see that as you and Timothy ended up playing um against sorry, you and Thomas ended up playing against each other on stream. And so how did you feel about how your deck was doing in the first 5 rounds? Because I know you didn't go undefeated, right?
Yeah, I finished 4-1, which was good for
Okay.
third seed going into top eight. Um, I thought the deck was great. I was really pleased with it throughout. Um, I think I had like a little bit of difficulty, and the math doesn't really support this because there are plenty of turn one plays. But there were a lot of like easy mulligan decisions. And
Mm,
I typically mulligan aggressively in this game. There are typically things I want in particular in a matchup, and I'll seek a second hand to find them if I don't see them in the first hand. But there were a lot of situations where I drew my initial six and just no turn one play. Uh,
wow.
so that was a bit weird and kind of amusing. But otherwise, I mean, for the most part, the matches were great. I felt like I was playing tight, um, drawing fortunately when I needed to, and just felt really comfortable with what the opponent was doing on the other side. Round one was against Boba Blue, right out of the gate, facing a control matchup. Boba Blue got enticing reward and like Snoke, among other things. Those are kind of the two
Oh
big
wow.
set two improvements that I think really help the archetype along. Um, I wound up winning that one 2-0, and I think one of the big reasons why I think I just had like the tempo advantage on the Boba flip and had the ability to immediately defeat their Boba when they flipped theirs. So had that board advantage already and was prepared for that. Um, Bazine was amazing, just picking off whichever spot removal. I didn't want them to cast, keeping other spot removal in their hand that was going to require them to spend their entire turn. So I still stayed ahead on tempo. Um, Using Bazine and Bodhi to kind of gut check whether or not they drew Super Laser Blast. In both games, I was pretty fortunate that they just never saw Super Laser Blast. They showed me two copies on the bottom of their deck after game two. Um, so that one felt pretty good. That was the only time I think I cast Zuckuss out of the board on the day, and kind of still medium on what Zuckuss brings out of the board. I like having just like another big threat that takes some pressure and attention off of Fire Spray, um, and it did a job there. My opponent played Snoke, and Zuckuss was still a big enough body to get through there and deal 4 to win it. So Um, yeah, round one, starting off 2-0, like that. My other two top eight performances in the 1K and 2Ks around here, I started out 0-1 and submarined my way in the top eight, so it's nice to start with a win for once. Round two, I played against Mono Red Han, the young Han, set two Han, and um, wound up losing that one 2-0. And the interesting thing about that, going into the tournament, was not really sure about the matchup in general. And like very limited testing, I felt like the matchup was 50-50, but it was like whoever was had initiative was going to win the game.
Mm,
And I couldn't necessarily like parse why that was yet. I just hadn't run enough games, but like that's what the data was telling me. So I lost the die roll in game one, and sure enough, lost game one. Just felt a step behind the entire way. It's just really hard to take tempo back from that deck because it runs like a similar game plan to Sabine early, and then pivots into dropping fatties ahead of curve. And you have the bouncing and the tap downs from Noga to be dead to take care of some of that, but you have to draw them. It seems like in a very particular order uh, to really churn the corner. I just didn't find it there. And then at game two, I mulliganed into no turn one play, and the game was basically a formality from there. Just can't really afford against any red aggressive deck to not have something to do on turn one. So
yeah.
uh, like played, tried to find a line, but still died pretty quickly. Um, so yeah, 1-1 after two rounds, and then there were a lot of bonus in attendance at this
Yeah.
1K.
A lot
Um,
of bobas.
so I ran into the mirror for the first time, and I thought I would play the mirror a lot more. This was the only time I played the mirror was in round three um, against someone who I think top four at the tournament. Um, I think four of my five Swiss opponents all top aided, so that's pretty cool. Um,
Was
took
it Jasper? Was Jasper playing? I played Jasper. I can't remember if he played Boba Yellow or Boba Green.
I didn't play Jasper. Jasper's definitely on Boba
Okay.
Yellow. I think Jasper might have
Okay.
been the undefeated Boba Yellow. Yeah,
Okay.
at the end of Swiss. So won the mirror 2-1. The big standouts there was I had two Relentless Pursuit in my deck, and my opponent I think had zero. And Relentless Pursuit was just an absolute house in the mirror. I think in both of my post board games, I flipped Boba and immediately put a shield token on him, and I was just like, okay, this is amazing. Uh, I can't remember if there's anything else that like significant that happened. They were on the Dr. Evazan plan. I remember Relentless Pursuing the Dr. Evazan and then untapping mana to play like another three drop. That felt really good for me. On my end, I think the only game I lost was due to a top decked Fett's Fire Spray. Otherwise, I think I was about to turn the corner in that game. So yeah, I felt really good about all three of those games. I actually kind of like the Boba Yellow Mirror. Obviously, it's a little draw dependent, but I think like there's a lot of dynamics and like who's the beat down versus who's the control, and do those roles shift and when they
hmm
shift. So uh, yeah, enjoyed that match. All three games very close. Round four, like you said, play Thomas on Ray Red um, on the TTI channel. I guess we won't go too in depth. I mean that you can go watch the game and see how it
Yeah,
went.
I'll put a have the link down below so people can check that one out for sure, and some of the other ones from that day.
Yeah, took that one 2-1 as well. I think that, like the salient detail that stands out to me is in game three, I had Thomas at 17 and a syndicate lackey in play. The right player starting with the initiative couldn't kill the lackey, or chose to do something else instead to play for like a larger gameplay. And I had surprise strike lackey to end it. I do remember in game one, my hand was actually trash. Was absolutely trash. It was like two Cunnings, which doesn't sound bad, but it was in this instance. Two
Yeah.
Cunnings, like a shoot first and a Greedo, up against, and it was turn three, so four resource churn, and I just had I think a Boba unit in play. I think I had like missed my two drop again. So just did a Boba unit in play, and for whatever reason, I was just like, you know what? Ray doesn't have takedown this turn. So I like buffed the Boba unit, and I think discarded a card or tap two or something. And just said I'm going to get in for seven because if I don't get in for seven here, I'm not winning this game. And they didn't have takedown, so read it perfectly.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, while I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this on camera. I bet chat is losing their mind because this is such a risky play. This is just like such an amateur level cunning." But it was intentional, even if it was admittedly very risky. So yeah, pushed through 7 damage, and then the second cunning was absolutely bonkers. I think I had a really good Boba flip turn, and then I think bounced back an Obi-Wan to Thomas's hand and got there. Um, so yes, now very good 3-1 going into round five. Played Ben on Sabine Green. Ben, very talented player, very good player around here. Um, and we were talking before, and we both kind of figured out due to our breakers that we were both in top eight because the number of X2s were going to make the cut. So we were basically playing for seeding. And here, I think I just really benefited from just new meta shenanigans and just like, hey, we don't know what like the new Boba Yellow deck list looks like. Caught him off guard with a mercenary gunship on turn one that took out his A wing, and that like just like shifted the game permanently in game one. Then game two, I just drew incredibly well. I was very fortunate. Drew a shoot first when I needed it to take out a Fighters for Freedom. Was drawing like no good to me dead at absolutely the right time. Put a Managed to find a way to put a Boba's armor on Boba leader, and that just kind of seals the deal
Yeah.
immediately. It's just like you have to draw Poe or you're dead. And he just didn't have the Poe to ECL. So yeah, was very fortunate in game two. Game two was probably not in neither of those games were really I think indicative of the matchup. And we played again in top four, and those games were a lot closer. Um, but yeah, it was a Swiss round. 4-1 felt great. And yeah, it was third seed in top eight.
Yeah, yeah. And what a day. I mean, it definitely, it wasn't really a filled out event as we've seen there, which makes sense. I mean, it's summer, it's 2 weeks after the set release. A lot of people are still traveling, some people just spent most of their money for cards, which makes sense. It's a little bit more pricier of event, and not everyone confident with what they want to play. So totally get that, but it still felt good. I know I still wanted to make it up there to top eight. I was chasing it in that final match, but I had to play Thomas that final round. But so it was nice to hear like how many 3-2s would kind of make that in there, which I thought was really good. And kind of like you said, it was definitely a great representation of a lot of great players in the area coming in and wanting to make that top eight slot. How'd you feel going in, like making it to top eight? You've only done that a couple of times at some of the big events, which that's all that really matters. You made it to all of them in the Portland area, but just kind of making it up there, and again, sitting at top eight at a Guardian table.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me the third time around was making sure that I was like energized
Mm,
and
yeah,
mentally ready and like still checked in and locked in. So I think it's you really do start to feel the fatigue after a while, and I think also in the Swiss rounds you're just chasing making top eight. So it feels like an achievement after the Swiss rounds, and you're like, oh, I'm done. I've had this catharsis, right? Oh, what? I still have to play.
yeah,
The games feel a little bit different in top eight sometimes. So um, yeah, just feeling focused. I think the environment, due to the number of players, I think the environment was also a bit looser, which I think helped a little. I think particularly with like nerves and those sorts of things. I think it also helped that my top eight opponent in quarters was a friend in Thomas, so who also just like came off his first top eight, so it was like huge kudos to him, and a big moment for him, top eighting his first TCG top eight. So um, yeah, I think those were the main things I carried going in. And then I think with most things, once the game starts, it's just like, okay, now it's all about like preparation and executing your lines and adapting on the fly and going from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a whole different feeling once you make it up there. It's always that nice part of like, okay, I've made prizes, I've made this, I'm walking away at least with this, whether it's a mat or something, or the accomplishment of making that top eight. And you're right, it's just it changes up the feel, but it's also comes at something a lot of players are unaware of, and you mentioned it, and most people probably wouldn't. But being aware of the fatigue, right? Being aware of like trying to set up your mindset going forward and preparing for that. Ben and I talked about that. I think that day of just like. Hey, we're smart enough to know you need to have snacks. We're smart enough to know you should probably have breakfast before you're doing a 10-hour event type thing that requires so much critical thinking, especially when you've already done 5 or 6 hours of it, and like the last 3 or 4 are really going to be the deciding factor of where you end up, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
Um, so going into the top eight, you had a couple of matches. Some were streamed, definitely the final one and stuff like that. But was there any match that just really stood out to you that you really enjoyed? You mentioned playing Thomas. Again. But yeah, what match really stood out to you the most in the top eight?
I think I mean all three of them had their moments. I think the top four against Ben on Sabine again was just such a different texture to what our Swiss round was, and I think more indicative of like what the matchup's going to be in set two. Um, just all three games very very close. A lot of really interesting decisions and like variations in lines. The game I think that I keep replaying and going back to in my head though is like game two of the final against Alex on Hung Green.
Mm,
Um, because I had taken game one and I was off to a pretty good start in game two. And whenever you're playing like an aggro oriented deck and you lose you lose the game and you've dealt 26 damage to base, you're kind of wondering like, okay, where's that 4 points of damage? Where could I have found that 4 points of damage? Especially when there's a card in your deck that says, I give this unit +4 power,
hmm
for the phase. So, um, that was one that was really interesting. I think the sequence that I felt like in the moment I was pretty proud of. I don't know if I maybe could have done something different, but, like, based on the board state, I was really happy with what I found. There was a churn where, um, Alex was on 8 resources, and I had 1 3 power attacker up, and Alex is around, I think, 22-ish life or something like that, and I had a cunning in hand, and he knew I had a cunning in hand. I also knew, or was making a very reasonable guess, that he had a home 1 in hand with an echo-based defender in the graveyard. So if I go to buff Cunning and tap down his remaining 2 attackers, he plays home 1 and puts a Sentinel in its way and just nullifies the whole Cunning. So my line was to tap down the 2 attackers, one of them being a Centauri Peacekeeper, which restored 2, which was big because it started to change combat math. Um,
Yes.
and then to discard a random card from his hand. So he had 2 cards in hand, so I had a 50-50 flip to get the home 1 out of his hand. And my thinking was this, if I get the home 1 out of his hand and attack for 3, then I'm live to top deck a surprise strike to win the game, and therefore the match, and therefore the tournament. And I hadn't seen a surprise strike yet, so I was like, I have pretty good odds, I think, to draw this surprise strike. So that's the line I took. I got the 50-50 on the home one, and just didn't draw the surprise strike. But I was just like, oh wow, pretty happy that like after 8 hours of
Yeah.
play, I could see something like that and make that read, and I felt pretty good about my decision then, even though it didn't get there in the end. But yeah, it was a pretty cool line, and it also just kind of showcases like just like how many different ways you can play this deck and why it's so fun to play.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot of options looking at the deck. I know I'm a fan of it. Relentless Pursuit was just It was just amazing and just so powerful. Like you said, like if you get Boba's armor and you're able to relentless pursuit on Boba with the armor, I mean, I know I got locked out when that happened, and you're right. There's just not many answers for Boba past that. So definitely great. And yeah, Alex, great player. I played against that Han Green deck. Played Alex several times, and he definitely knows what he's doing. Peacekeeper. Yeah, you're right. Just throws off that mask so much with the raid, the restore. So I mean, victory for sure. Just getting the home one out of his hand. That's great. So
Yeah, Alex was a great finals opponent to have. Also, his list was so cool. Just super toolboxy, and just had a lot of really interesting fun ofs to play around. So yeah, do feel bad for him that like game three, he mulliganed basically into an unplayable hand, which is kind of an anticlimactic way to I think end our best of three. Um, but yeah, very talented player. I'm sure he'll be back in top eights. No problem.
yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of matches between you two. I'm always excited when Alex and I get sit down and do some matches. We were 1 for 1 now in the big tournament, so I'm waiting for our third match there and
There
see
you
see
go.
how that finishes out. Well, Rob, thanks so much, man, for coming on and just chatting about your deck, chatting about your experiences. I always enjoy playing with you, watching your games, and at a lot of these events, and getting time to just play test some stuff with you. Again, really appreciate it. Anything else you want to say before we finish up?
Likewise, David. Thank you for having me. Always good to game with you as well. Um, Past that, thanks for Guardian Games hosting it. Thanks to Rebel Trader and the TTI channel for putting on a stream for all of us. That was really nice. Yeah, thanks to Matt out in Oklahoma, my testing partner or one of them. And thanks to the KTOD community for like distilling a bunch of information. It's a great online community to join up in um, and join that competitive discourse. Um, yeah, um, hope this game thrives. It's a lot of fun to play, and I'm happy to play it up here with all you guys.
Yeah, man. I think we're on to something really big, and I think we'll see a lot like bigger things like this happening in the Portland area with our growth. And yeah, a second shout out to all those great content creators out there, communities out there, and all the people willing to play test online and talk decks. So one of the reasons why we can. Do so well a lot of these tournaments is because people are willing to do this stuff online and chat and discuss and play. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Thanks again, Rob. And yeah, thanks so much again for staying and listening to this interview with Rob, the champion of the most recent Portland 1K. Thanks again to Guardian Games for hosting. Really appreciate them and the staff and what they're able to do. If you this type of content that you'd like to see more of, make sure you comment and subscribe. Let me know what you're looking for other future events in the area. And maybe you're a champion yourself at your local scene. If you want to sit and talk about your experiences, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Again, we'll have links in the description to what I played, what Rob played, as well as to the TTI video where you can watch a lot of other games from some of our Portland locals. Thanks again, and may the Force be with you.